theory, just borrowed the old shrink ray and shot their massive campaign game and turned it into this. They bolted on the 20 strong system onto their previous IP in Hoplomachus, and I'm gonna jump in today and figure out, first of all, is this thing fun? And is this just a copy and paste onto a system with no real connection to the original game? Or did they pull off a miracle and get everything in this into this? Were they able to get this multi-hour campaign game sitting at $150, probably 150 pounds in neoprene and plastic, into this less than a pound PVC card packed little box? So now let's jump into what this game is, how it's implemented in that 20 strong system, and we'll answer some of those other questions at the end. Like all the other 20 strong decks, your goal really starts with trying to level up your stats. Each hero card has a set number of stats. You set the stat die to that number, and then it goes up and down based upon various game effects. One of the big differences in this system is you don't start with all 17 dice. In fact, 8 of them start in this concept that is unique to the Hoplomachus deck, the training ground. Very similar to the big base game, you're trying to get those dice trained so you can use them in future battles. Through bloodshed and sporting events, you're trying to acquire benefits and items that will help you along your journey. That's also how, by the way, you upgrade those stat dice. You're also acquiring tactics, just like the big game. Those are one-use kind of powerful items, essentially. Throughout your journey, you're going to be able to come in contact with Primuses, just like the other game, and defeat them. You need to defeat them because once you defeat the third, you can move on to the Scion. And ultimately, that's what you're trying to do to win this game. And unique to this game, you have to defeat all of the enemies in that in-game encounter to win. Pretty simple, right? Let's dive just a little bit deeper into the turn structure, because the selection of what you're going to face is probably the most unique out of all 3 decks. You divide the cards into stacks, and they basically are the shape of Mount Vesuvius. Thematically, you're trying to get to the top of that mountain to face that Scion. And in doing so, you're taking your little chip marker and moving it 1 stack at a time and activating the card that's underneath it. And if that card that you're activating has that add enemy symbol, you have to add an enemy from an adjacent stack sitting around your camp spot. Now, if you move to an adjacent spot to set up camp, you're welcome to spectate that particular event. If you do spectate that, there's a printed effect on the Scion that you're facing that you have to suffer, and spoiler alert, they suck. However, the benefit there is you get to discard the top card from the deck that you're sitting on top of. You get to recover 1 health or recover a die. If you land on one of the green opportunity cards, you get to skip this next engagement step, take the opportunity, slot it into your inventory. It does take up an item spot that's connected to your strategy stat. However, it does have a powerful effect. Once you've completed the particular requirement on the opportunity card, you flip it over and gain the benefit, and they are pretty powerful. Now, if you went into a bloodshed or a sporting event, that's when you get into the nitty-gritty of this thing. That's when you go into engagement, and you basically just start battling your little hearts out with that 20 strong system. There are some alterations to that system. If it's a bloodshed event and you end up not defeating it and having to take damage, you then have to send one of your die to the training ground. That is awful. Those die are the most important resource in this whole game. And then the sporting event, as an alternate to the reward that's printed on the card, you can train a die from the training ground or gain a tactic. But outside of that, similar to everything else, you commit dice, you roll them, you apply them, and then you move into the resolve phase. If you didn't defeat it, you got to suffer the damage on the card. You've got to deal with the after effects printed on the enemy you were facing. You have to exhaust all of the dice that you just committed for that battle, meaning you can't use them next time unless you recover them, which you can recover a number of dice equal to your recovery stat. There's also opportunities in the items and effects on the cards to get some of those dice back or train dice, but that is a really important kind of mechanic to this game. And then pretty simply put, you discard everything and rinse and repeat. The one caveat is if there is Scion influence kind of stamping on that card, they go into a deck that will absolutely affect how that Scion plays. And we'll talk about it in just a second, but each Scion uses that in a totally different way. But first, let's talk a little bit about the Primuses. There's 3 Primuses that are behind these main stacks. You can really go and activate them at any time and face them, because once again, the goal is to kind of defeat all of them before you can make it to the Scion. When you activate the Primus, you'll have to activate more enemies, and you have to defeat everything to move on, unlike the bloodshed and the sporting events, where when you don't defeat everything, you just deal with the consequences and move on to the next movement. Dice aren't exhausted in between rounds, so they're staying on the enemies that they were applied to, so you can't kind of rinse and repeat and recover those same dice back to use them to try to do more damage and defeat all of the enemies. And then when you defeat it, you have to suffer a Bane, and those Banes suck. Let me tell you a story. I was fighting Aprilis, and she is tricky, because then her Bane is that you have to suffer the effects of the Bane of the character that you chose. Because each one of these heroes, if you're familiar with the core base game, is also used as a Primus. So you flip to the other side of your hero and there is a Primus effect. And that effect on my hero, which is the Parthian, is to first of all recover all of your dice. Hey, that's really good. Recovering all of them, that's awesome. And then swap them with all of the dice in the training ground. Now, I had 16 dice, and there was 1 in the training ground. This was my last Primus to defeat, so I traded 16 dice for 1, and that was so brutal. That sucked so bad. And that brings me to my Primus suck list. Number 3 on that list is Bing King. Let's see, 7 health, that sucks. In the first applied dice step of each engagement, Bing King is the only enemy dice can be applied to. Bing King's attack is equal to the number of dice applied to her, so that sucks. And you lose a strategy stat if you don't apply any dice to get around that. That sucks. And then her Bane, you get to recover all your dice. That's good. But then you have to weaken 5 dice. Weaken means they just down level to a lower level with a lower hit chance, and that just sucks. Number 2 is Sea Strider. I don't get any rewards for any of the non-boss enemies that are activated. That sucks. And for every purple dice that I've recruited, I have to take a hit to a stat. That is devastating, especially late game. If you've recruited much of the dice and you have all of those beloved purples, which are the second best dice below the red, that could kill you. I mean, that's -4 to a stat. And if you have not recruited any of the purple dice, you lose 2 health. Gross. And number 1 on the suck list is that aforementioned Parthian. They suck. To swap your dice out with the training ground late game is pretty devastating. I will forever be scarred by that experience. So like I said, those Primuses on the other side of them have heroes, and there's a lot of them. There's 9 heroes and 9 Primuses at the same time with a wide variety of abilities. To start the game, you deal 4 and you have to select one of them. The other 3 become the Primuses for the game. Like all of the other decks, they have those core base stats to them and also have a special ability. There's a wide variety of effects, and some are great and some not so much, but I do have a list of my 3 absolute favorites. Number 3 is the aforementioned hero side of Aprilis. After completing a Primus conflict, recruit the strongest die in the training grounds. Then you may place the defeated Primus card in your inventory as an item, hero side face up, and use their ability infinitely. Awesome. Then we have Sea Strider. Hits on yellow dice deal 2 damage. At the end of the recover dice step, you may recover 1 yellow dice. And Parthian starts with a totally different distribution of dice. Instead of the usual allotment, it starts with 3 yellow, 3 green, 3 blue, 1 red, and no purple. During activation, you may move to a non-adjacent camp if its top card is an opportunity. That is really good because you find yourself out on the mountain, totally getting stuck sometimes, not wanting to move to any of the adjacent options, and Parthian's ability to get there is pretty cool, and it's got a really good dice distribution to start the game. So the Scions you're facing, there's 9 of them. There is a ton of variability. They all use the idea of that Scion symbol deck that you're putting together in a totally different way. One really unique example is with Hoplomachus. He adds an additional enemy each round on setup, +1 to you for any stat for every 2 influence. So you add up all the influence in that deck. So that feels pretty good. If all stats reach their max, +1 enemy for each stat increase you can't resolve. So if you've built up this really great hero and you're not able to increase those stats, that could add a ton of extra enemies that you have to defeat. Each time you apply a die to Hoplomachus, -1 to any stat, okay? All hits are treated as misses and all misses are treated as hits. And if your stats are at 1, Hoplomachus is defeated. So there's a lot of really unique encounters in that end game. And with 9 of them, there is a ton of variety for you to experience in this game. So in general, my critique on the system, which I will relay in every one of these videos, is it's awesome. I can't wait for more decks. I really am excited for the new IPs. I think the way they implemented the IP here is honestly spectacular. It's pretty amazing. There's a couple things missing, like strategic movement and also the map specific rules, which I absolutely love for variety in the base game. But most everything else is here. There's a ton of variety with 9 scions, primuses, and heroes. Every single game is going to be completely different with the encounter selection system that's in a pyramid resembling Mount Vesuvius, and how you're moving around on that map. It's kind of simulating your journey in the full campaign. The footprint of this game is relatively small. It travels really, really well. The amount of strategy and tactics being used here and alterations to your character, whether it be through tactics, items, one-time bonuses, the inherent power that each one of these heroes has, kind of creates a really interesting puzzle on top of the primuses that you're having to defeat, the banes in which that you have to deal with as you defeat them, and then the subsequent scion influence and how it affects the actual scion battle at the end of the game. There's a ton here in this teeny tiny little box, and my hat's off. They've done a really, really great job on implementation. And if you want to know how these other decks fare, there's one that I really, really love and one in which kind of fell a little short of expectations. You're going to have to click those above. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you. I'm out.